Hey, what's up, winners? It's been a while, but today we're diving into what's being hailed as the biggest patch since launch in Dune Awakening, version 1.1.20.0, dropping August 12th. This update is full of fixes, quality of life improvements, and balance changes that could reshape the deep desert meta. I'm breaking it all down so you'll know exactly what matters and what's still missing. This latest patch is one of the most impactful updates Dune Awakening has seen so far, not because of one big headline feature, but because of how many long requested fixes and subtle balance changes hit all at once. Some of these might even shift the PvP meta. Some fix long-standing issues that frustrated almost every player that I've talked to. And others, honestly, they just prove the devs are finally listening, at least in some areas. Let's break down everything that actually matters. Starting off with the changes to techniques, Center of Mass now has an increased penalty to headshot damage, going from minus 10% to minus 25%. That's a huge shift. I still use Center of Mass, but I also run a passive that boosts my headshot damage, so the final result for me won't be quite as brutal. What's interesting is that at the same time they've removed the body damage penalty from marksman. Makes me think more players were leaning on Center of Mass because headshots in this game just aren't reliable. Try standing in front of someone with a shotgun and aiming for the head. You'll probably miss. Not because of your aim, but because headshot detection in Dune Awakening is wildly inconsistent. So honestly, I don't even care about the nerf. If headshots aren't tied to skill, then you can't really punish players for giving up on them. We also got a small but important tweak to visual clarity. Suspensor belt trails have been toned down when you're moving at high speed. Visibility in the air has always been terrible, especially with the game's awful view distance. So reducing the visual clutter here might make spotting airborne targets harder, or potentially even easier depending on how it interacts with lighting. Either way, it'll shift how people engage in vertical fights. And then there's the stamina regeneration indicators. These might be the most quietly useful changes in the whole patch. Now, when your stamina isn't regenerating, the lower left and middle screen icons will actually show that you're being blocked. There have been so many times I thought my stamina was bugged or just wasn't refilling, but really it was probably just something preventing regen and no way to know. Now at least you'll have that info on screen, and even the remaining delay will show up as a visual buff icon. Clarity like this should have been in since day one. Ornithopter landings also got a huge quality of life upgrade. There's now built-in spacing between ornithopters when you spawn or land, which might sound small until you've had your thopter sandwiched between two others and couldn't take off or even get in. Combine that with another key fix. Ornithopters no longer get stuck when worms are roaming nearby. That one's been a killer, literally. I've seen and heard about tons of players losing their thopter and all their gear just because a worm decided to loiter near spawn. Hopefully this means fewer rage quits after getting unfairly body blocked by nature. Speaking of worm behavior, deep desert sandworms now have a 50% chance to use the shorter breach animation. If you've harvested a lot of spice by hand, you'll know that sometimes all you get is a half-second audio cue and then boom, worm pops up and you're lucky if you're not beneath it. This is going to make harvesting spice sand by hand even more difficult, which I will talk about more later. Along with that, static compactors now increase worm aggression. I've heard from a lot of players who are on the edge with this game already, and random worm deaths might be the final straw that pushes more of them away. Another simple sounding fix that actually matters, abandoned vehicles now take longer to attract sandworms. That gives players a real window to get back to their gear or recover a thopter they had to ditch. It's small, but in this game, seconds make all the difference. Here's a change I never thought I'd have to celebrate. The missing taxi service icon has finally been added to the map legend. I can't tell you how many times I've seen players, especially newer ones, wandering around asking where the taxi is because there was literally no map marker. It's the kind of thing that should have never been missing, but hey, we'll take the win. Sound design finally got a much needed pass too. Ornithopter engines are quieter now, which is a godsend. They had previously boosted those sounds to absurd levels, like drown out everything else loud. It was hard to hear your own voice comms over it. Now you can actually take off without feeling like your eardrums are being destroyed. On that note, they also claim to have improved voice chat stability. I'll believe that when I see it. Right now, proximity voice chat can be buggy as hell, with the mic icon lingering over players' heads forever, basically lighting them up for enemies to spot and kill. If that bug's gone, this is a real upgrade. But we've heard voice chat stability improved before, so I'm not celebrating just yet. Server performance got some love too. They've addressed multiple crash issues, plus a specific bug that caused massive ping spikes or sudden lag, even when nothing major was happening. I've experienced this a lot, where the game just stutters or freezes up for a few seconds and then stabilizes. Hopefully that's gone. And speaking of freezes, the dreaded border crossing freeze has supposedly been fixed. This one was brutal. Fly across a server mesh and suddenly crash into the sand because the client froze mid-transition. It happened to way too many people and way too often. There's also a fix for rubber banding after reconnecting while traveling between deep desert partitions. That one caused major headaches for players rejoining friends or trying to complete long-haul travel without losing sync. Combined with the border crossing fix, it could finally make deep desert runs feel smooth again. One of the more serious PvP exploits got a solid patch. You can no longer build horizontal shields without attaching them to walls. That was a cornerstone of the Pentashield meta, abusing shields to create floaty, janky, near invulnerable bases. Between this and another huge PvP fix, Pentashield surfaces now taking damage, base rating is finally back on the table. For too long, it felt like players who were taking advantage of the exploit had all the power. This should help shift things back toward balance. Another big visual fix is that Spice Bloom visuals now accurately reflect the actual field size. That means you can fly by, glance at a spice field, and get a real sense of whether it's worth landing or not. Before, some of the smaller or medium fields looked identical until they erupted, wasting your time or potentially even getting you killed. And while we're at it, those weird sporadic spice nodes that couldn't be harvested, supposedly fixed. We'll see. The self-healing passive was underperforming, but that's been corrected, finally giving back the proper bonus. The rerouting passive also got a small buff to its power regen bonus, up to 3, 6, and 10% now. And on the other side, Source of Power got smacked with a heavy nerf. Its bonus is now 30% instead of 100%. That's a big hit, especially for players who relied on it during base raids or when using high drain weapons like the plasma cannon or lasgun. It's probably still viable for base raids, but other than that, I wouldn't bring it. Crippling Strike is another sleeper buff. Its stamina cost has been lowered, which makes it an even better tool in PvP. It was already one of the stronger offensive options, and now it's even more accessible in sustained fights. One of the potentially biggest shifts to the meta involves Suspensor Blast. You can no longer hold it indefinitely to maintain hyper armor. Now it only grants hyper armor for the first second of activation. You used to be able to stall out fights or avoid damage by just holding the ability and waiting. Now you have to commit, and mistiming it will now punish you. Honestly, I think this is a good move. The ability's still strong, but it's no longer a get out of jail free card. Another interesting change is if you cancel certain abilities mid-cast, the game no longer forgives you with a 2.5 second reset. You get slapped with the full cooldown. It's a risky change. A lot of us have had abilities fail to cast or get interrupted by jank, so punishing the player with a full cooldown might feel unfair. It's not clear yet whether this applies universally or just to certain abilities. If it applies to all abilities, that's going to punish players for situations often outside of their control. And to me, it feels like it was added without really understanding how these abilities get used in the moment-to-moment chaos of PvP. So that change is something to keep an eye on. An issue related to spamming capsule launcher-related abilities has supposedly also been fixed, but the patch notes are super vague. If it stops those weird moments where energy capsule or grenades just vanish or don't trigger, I'm all for it. The Sentinel turret also got a quality of life fix. The Sentinel will no longer deploy directly above your head, which was a nightmare in tight quarters. You'd try to reposition and just slam into your own deployable. Super frustrating, especially in PvP. Hopefully this fix actually works and doesn't create new weirdness. Power regen also had a strange bug that's supposedly going to be gone. In certain cases, it would just stop working altogether, making it impossible to activate things like the Holtzman shield. I've run into this one myself. It's incredibly annoying and usually requires unequipping and re-equipping the power pack just to get back online. If they really squash this, it's a big deal. Another strange bug got addressed where abilities could activate without input, basically casting themselves due to weird interactions. That's happened to me a few times and can totally throw a fight, so I'm glad they looked into it. Whether it's fixed for good, we'll find out soon enough. Litany Against Fear also got a bunch of updates. As of now, it's one of the few Bene Gesserit abilities that offered real team support, but once the patch drops, in my opinion, it's been gutted. Rather than tightening the mechanics, they've seemingly just nerfed how effective or consistent it is across the board. The visuals now persist correctly based on the ability's rank, and it no longer bugs out when used alongside other abilities. There is a strange issue where outside buffs would remain active way outside the intended AoE of Litany of Fear. They even updated the tooltip to better explain what Litany of Fear does, something this game needs more of across the board. But overall, it seems like a lot of the things that made Litany many of fear viable, they've taken away because they were bugs. Definitely not the way to encourage class variety. Another potentially major change with massive PvP implications, Compel now works on suspended targets. That means if someone's flying around on a suspensor belt, you can yank them down or interrupt them with Compel. On paper, being able to yank players out of the sky sounds amazing, especially if you've been annoyed by floaty builds abusing elevation and Ancient Way spam. This could be a huge tactical tool, especially against the high-flying Ancient Way builds that rely on verticality to dominate. If Compel starts becoming meta, we might see a real shift in how people approach air-based duels. Vehicle damage also got a long overdue logic fix. Previously, if you destroyed one module on a vehicle, any new damage wouldn't necessarily transfer to the chassis. It might just get ignored if the damaged module was no longer quote-unquote attached. Now, damage is always passed to the chassis, which means you don't have to surgically hit every remaining piece of a Thopter to finish it off. Cleaner, fairer, and a lot less frustrating. They also claim to have fixed an issue where ornithopters would get stuck if a worm was nearby. This is another one that's super vague, but if it stops the bug where worms paralyze your vehicle just by being in the area, that's another solid quality of life improvement. Here's one that might seem small but could have a surprising impact on how we interact with vehicles. From now on, a player has to be either the owner or a co-owner of a vehicle to repair its modules. At first glance, this might just seem like a guild management tweak, but in practice, it adds a little more friction to field repairs. You'll either need to assign co-ownership beforehand or have friends drop welding wire. In high-pressure PvP or during a desert op, that added step could mean the difference between getting airborne or getting left behind. Colliding with the sandworm's body at any point in its animation now results in instant death and vehicle destruction. I've only personally managed to land on a worm's back once after hundreds of hours of play, and while it was kind of hilarious, that's officially off the table now. The developers clearly want worms to be terrifying, untouchable forces of nature, and honestly, I respect that, but it also reinforces how unforgiving this world can be, especially when the physics don't always play fair. The Solido replicator also got a quiet but meaningful buff. It can now copy decorations and placeables. That's a huge quality of life change for players building in the deep desert or anyone trying to set up outposts fast. For guilds and organized teams, this means much less tedium when you want multiple outposts to follow the same layout or vibe. It's the kind of small fix that makes long-term play feel more enjoyable, especially when you're doing infrastructure work. Finally, there's a tiny addition with a big impact. The deposit all water and extract all blood buttons are finally in the game. This is one of those why did it take this long type of fixes. Anyone who's played more than a few hours knows how ridiculously tedious it was to click the same item over and over just to offload resources. It really felt like the devs hadn't actually played the game that they were building. But hey, better late than never. This change alone will save players hours in the long run. Those were the biggest and most impactful changes in this patch. And while some of them were absolutely necessary, others raise real concerns. It's clear the devs are trying to address long-standing issues, but the execution feels uneven. Some fixes are months overdue, while other changes risk making core gameplay loops more frustrating. It's progress, but not without missteps. If you stuck with me this far, seriously thank you. But now we've got to talk about a couple changes coming in this patch that give me an even greater cause for concern. Previously, rockets required 1 duraluminum ingot and 10 fuel cells. After the patch, they'll cost 4 ingots and 20 fuel cells. That's not a tweak, that's a quadrupling of metal and doubling of fuel. It's hard to justify. Rockets are not overpowered, and they're essential for dealing with vehicles, defending bases, and participating in PvP. In a game already plagued by tedious grind, this feels like a lazy way to slow players down rather than offering meaningful content. It punishes players who actually engage with the mechanics. And for what? To stretch out playtime? If anything, it risks pushing people away from a game that's already struggling to retain its core community. Then there's the static compactor threat increase. Now I understand the intention. Using a hand compactor to harvest spice has become pretty meta, and it does need risk to match the reward. But compacting spice by hand is one of the few efficient ways to farm without wasting hours. By increasing threat generation, Funcom is forcing more worm encounters and heightening the risk of PvP interruptions. It's a pressure spike that feels out of touch with the current state of the player base. Many players are barely hanging on on, and making spice farming even more volatile might be the final push they need to log out and not come back. There's a fine line between risk and frustration, and this change seems likely to fall on the wrong side, especially with players who are already teetering on the edge of moving on, and then they get eaten by a worm, losing their orny, their gear, etc. I could see even more players saying goodbye to this game over something like that. Now that we've gone over the questionable changes, let's talk about what's still missing, because while this patch does address a lot of pain points, some of the game's most frustrating issues remain untouched. These aren't nitpicks either, they're fundamental quality of life problems and long-standing community requests that players have been flagging for months. For a patch that was billed as the most significant update so far, it's surprising, and honestly a bit disheartening, that these core problems are still being ignored. Let's break down the biggest disappointments. First up, labeling. Still no way to label your ornithopters or storage chests. It might sound like a small thing, but if you've played this game even semi-seriously, you know how common it is to misplace your gear or materials. You land after a long haul, scramble to transfer loot or swap modules, and realize too late you just dumped your personal stash into someone else's thopter. Or maybe you're organizing your base, trying to separate crafting mats, spice, and gear across multiple chests, and there's zero way to know what's where without opening each one. It's not just annoying, it's inefficient, and in a game that already leans heavily on grind and inventory management, this kind of oversight slows everything down. Labeling should have been a day one feature, and it's baffling to me that it's still not here. Then there's the 4-player party limit, which continues to make coordinated play harder than it needs to be. Dune Awakening is at its best when you're playing with a group, squatting up to take down a spice field, coordinate a raid, or run long-haul transport jobs. But 4 people just isn't enough for the scale of this game. If you've ever had to split up your group or coordinate between 2 parties using voice chat and map markers alone, you know how clunky and outdated this system feels. And the worst part, the 4-man limit actually increases the chances of friendly fire or accidental PvP. You can't tag everyone in your real squad, and that leads to confusion, especially during chaotic encounters in the deep desert. A slightly larger cap, 6 or even 8 players, would alleviate this completely and let players actually play the game the way it was meant to be played, together. And the frustration doesn't stop there. Even if you manage to form a party, the system itself breaks down across server mesh lines. Party markers just vanish when someone crosses over, making it impossible to track your squad unless you're in constant communication. This might sound like a minor technical hiccup, but when combined with the small party size, it becomes a compounding issue. You're already trying to coordinate a group that's too small, and now half the time you can't even see where your teammates are. It completely breaks immersion and disrupts any kind of long-range cooperation. For a game that prides itself on large-scale exploration and faction-based warfare, this is a massive failure in basic party functionality. These aren't difficult features to implement. Other MMOs have solved them years ago. Funcom's continued silence on these problems is not a good sign. And for all the disappointments and quality of life oversights that are not in this patch, they're still just surface level compared to the real problems. The fundamental design failures that continue to be ignored. These are the kind of problems that quietly bleed players from a game like this. These aren't just balance tweaks or minor bugs. They're the foundational systems that make or break long-term engagement. And if these aren't fixed soon, no number of patches will stop the slow drip of player retention. They're core systems that drive the entire loop of risk, reward, and replayability. If Funcom doesn't stop kicking these can't-miss issues down the road, no amount of bug fixes or balance tweaks will matter. Players aren't quitting over missing labels. They're quitting because the heart of the end game feels empty, unfinished, and unrewarding. Let's talk about the state of PvP loot, because this is quietly becoming one of the biggest reasons players are disengaging. The entire point of high-risk PvP zones like shipwrecks and testing stations is to reward players who take the risk. But lately, those rewards have fallen completely flat. High-risk PvP zones like shipwrecks and testing stations are supposed to be the pinnacle of reward-based gameplay. But instead of dishing out rare, exciting, or exclusive gear, players are often walking away with generic or easily obtainable items. It's not just disappointing, it actively punishes people for engaging with the most dangerous parts of the game. PvP already comes with natural costs, durability damage, lost gear, respawn delays. If you don't offset that with superior rewards, players will stop opting in. And that's exactly what we're seeing. More and more people ignore these events because they know it's not worth the effort. That inconsistency has a ripple effect. When players lose confidence in the loot pool, fewer of them show up. PvP events become become ghost towns. Fights become rare. The tension that should define these hotspots disappears entirely, and the entire loop collapses. Suddenly, you're not just dealing with bad loot, you're dealing with fewer players online, less competition, and a dead endgame. The solution isn't rocket science. PvP rewards need to feel exclusive, valuable, and consistent. They don't all need to be overpowered, but they should always feel worth the risk. PvP testing stations and shipwrecks should be a reliable path toward the best gear in the game, not Mark 6 Albatross wings. Without that, there's no reason to fight, no reason to log in, and no reason to stay invested. And with PvP already being the main driver of late game interactions, Funcom can't afford to keep letting these loot drops suck the air out of the room. Moving on, if the inconsistent loot tables weren't already killing PvP momentum, the randomized chest spawn timers are driving the final nail in the coffin. Right now, players can end up sitting around for anywhere from 45 minutes up to 2 hours just waiting for one chest to respawn. That is not engaging gameplay. It's not suspenseful. It's not fun. It's a complete momentum killer. In PvP zones where tension and pacing are everything, this randomness isn't a mechanic, it's dead weight. A major aspect of the in-game PvP game loop is built around these chests. And when the spawn timers feel completely unpredictable, players stop showing up. Why bother organizing a squad or coordinating with friends if there's a chance you'll waste your entire session standing around doing nothing? That downtime adds up, especially when you factor in how frequently players come away from those long waits with garbage loot. It creates a cycle of frustration. The loot is trash, so fewer people show up, so less PvP happens. The loot feels even more pointless to those that do, so even fewer people log in the next time. It's not a content loop, it's a content drain. And the funniest part is that it used to be better. At launch, these chests had much shorter, more consistent timers. You could plan around them. You knew when to move, when to gear up, when to expect a fight. And while that had its own issue with players logging out, setting timers, then logging back in at the right time, it was still a much better system than the current one. Instead of just getting rid of the logging out and in exploit and building on that solid foundation, Funcom fixed the system by extending the timer ranges and adding RNG. The result has been more waiting, less action, and a PvP loop that feels slower and more punishing than ever. What makes this even worse is that we've seen other games solve this already. MMOs and survival titles alike have long since learned that predictable timers encourage engagement. When players know something valuable will appear at a specific time, they show up. They prepare, they fight. That's what Dune Awakening needs. Not arbitrary windows, but structured incentives. Because as it stands now, PvP players are being told, wait longer, fight fewer people, and maybe you'll get a reward that doesn't completely suck. And that's not a gamble many are willing to keep taking. Another core issue is the complete lack of meaningful design around control points. Right now, control points feel like an afterthought. Nobody I've ever talked to actually cares about them, and there's a good reason for that. They don't matter. The Landsrad weekly victory system barely even acknowledges them. You can cap them and walk away and you're done. There's no need to hold the point, no PvP skirmish over maintaining control, and no real reward for effort. Just cap it and move on. And when you compare that to something like crafting Mark 5 radiation suits or Regis missile launchers, which by the way award way more Landsrad points, it becomes obvious why everyone skips control points entirely. They're not worth the time. And worse than being irrelevant, the control points are boring. There's no gameplay loop tied to them. They're not a tug of war, they're not a king of the hill type situation, and they don't lead to any cool emergent faction warfare. Imagine instead if control points function like actual objectives. You had to stay on them to hold them, and if a faction claimed one, it would broadcast a notification server-wide. Something like House Atreides is taking the control point at H7. Suddenly you'd have a real incentive to gather your squad, defend the area, or even launch an assault to reclaim it. Those fights would be memorable. They'd make you care about the map. They'd make you feel like part of a larger war effort. But right now, control points are just another wasted opportunity. The entire system feels like it was shoved into the game late in development and never finished. And that's a running theme with the Deep Desert in general. It feels like a framework with placeholders, rather than a polished in-game environment. If Funcom gave control points real weight in the weekly victory tally, real rewards for holding them, and real mechanics to encourage conflict over them, the Deep Desert could come alive with large-scale PvP. But until then, they're just map clutter that nobody wants to interact with. And that leads us straight into the most glaring issue facing Dune Awakening right now. There's just not enough to do at endgame. Once you've got your base set up, your gear crafted, and your guild established, what's left? Harvest spice maybe? Harvest titanium if you need it? Hope a PvP shipwreck spawns with something that isn't dog water? But none of it really feels like compelling compelling content. There are no dynamic events, no real territory wars, no systems that pull you and your squad back in with urgency. And it's not just that the content is lacking, it's that the systems that do exist, like control points, feel so disconnected and low impact that players don't even bother with them. This lack of structure is crushing player motivation. Imagine logging in and thinking, what should we do today? And the best answers are harvest resources, do a vendor run, or roll the dice on a loot spawn. The deep desert should feel alive, like it's reacting to you, like it's daring you to take risks and rewarding you for pushing further out. But instead it's static, predictable, a wasteland in all the wrong ways. With proper faction-based dynamic events, like spice refineries that need defending, convoy ambushes, or raidable points that offer real loot, you could have reasons to clash with other players beyond just boredom. Instead, the world waits for you to make your own fun, while offering you almost nothing to support it. And the craziest part to me is that the bones are there. The world design, the traversal, the factions, the combat system, they all could support something amazing. But right now it feels like half a game. The real problem isn't that the developers focus too much on PvE or too little on PvP. It's that they created this massive, ambitious space and then populated it with the bare minimum amount of content. There are just enough systems to give the illusion of a functional endgame, but none of them are layered, dynamic, or interconnected enough to actually sustain a player base. It's like building a massive arena and only tossing in a single objective. If any one thing, like the loot table or chest spawns or control point mechanics, falls short, the entire structure collapses under its own weight because there's nothing else to lean on. This is what makes the lack of in-game content so damaging. The margin for error is razor thin. Players aren't choosing between multiple meaningful activities. They're stuck doing the same 2 or 3 things over and over again. And if even one of those things stops being rewarding or fun, that's it. There's no fallback loop, no alternate progression path, no shift in gameplay that keeps people engaged. For a game built on the idea of an evolving survival sandbox in a harsh, dangerous world, it feels oddly empty at the top. And if that doesn't change soon, and I mean soon, players won't just log out, they'll move on completely. The warning signs are hard to ignore. Dune Awakening launched with a massive all-time peak of over 189,000 players. Proof that the hype and potential were absolutely there. But fast forward to today, and the 24-hour peak hovers around 44,000 and often lower during off hours. That's a steep drop, and you can feel it in every part of the game. Zones feel emptier, server activity is down, and even formerly active guilds are going pretty quiet. PvP encounters that used to break out constantly are becoming rare. The community that gave this world its heartbeat is starting to fade, and in a game that relies on population to drive its sandbox systems, that's not just unfortunate, it's dangerous. And the pace of content and system updates isn't matching the urgency of the decline. Players are logging out because they're running out of reasons to log in. That's not a problem you fix with UI tweaks or minor tuning passes. It takes fresh, meaningful content, new objectives, better incentives, and reasons for players to engage with one another beyond just farming spice or avoiding sandworms. The longer that core loop stays shallow, the more likely it is that people will leave permanently. And in a game like this, population is content. Once it drops too low, even the best designed systems will collapse from lack of participation. And let's be honest, a lot of this was avoidable. The creative director Joel Bylos himself admitted the game launched, quote, in the earliest launchable state. And that's exactly how it feels. The story portion of the game is polished. The core gameplay loop is smooth at first, and the visuals and traversal systems make a strong first impression. But once you reach the deep desert and start engaging with what's supposed to be the real game, it all starts to unravel. The illusion of depth fades fast. The systems that should be layered and complex are thin and undercooked. The factions, the PvP, the territory control, none of it has the staying power it needs. There are mechanics, but not meaning. And that goes back to this patch. This patch was marketed as a big turning point, something to win back lapsed players and re-energize the base. And to its credit, there are some good changes here. Some long-standing issues were finally addressed. A few PvP systems will likely be rebalanced. Quality of life improvements added polish. But taken as a whole, the patch still feels like another step in a long, slow jog, when what the game really needs is a leap, a hard pivot, something bold that says we're serious about fixing this. Until that happens, the bleeding is going to continue. And at some point, it won't matter how good the next patch is, there won't be enough players to care about it. Thanks for sticking around through the whole breakdown. I know this one was long, but there's a lot going on under the surface with Dune Awakening, and I wanted to dig into it all. I will be be continuing to stream Dune Awakening regularly, multi-streaming across 7 different platforms. So if you want to catch some live gameplay, ask questions, or just hang out, come drop by. Doesn't matter where you watch from. YouTube, Twitch, Kick, Rumble, TikTok, even Twitter and Instagram, I'll be live and in the dunes. Also, I genuinely want to hear what you think. Whether you agree, disagree, or have your own experiences to share about the current state of the game, drop a comment. What's working for you? What's driving you nuts? What changes would bring you back if you've already stopped playing? I read everything and I'm always down to talk shop about this game. And as always, remember, it's only GG when you win.